Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. You know, every once in a while in life, you meet somebody and it's like right away you've got this connection. They're fascinating. You know, you're locked in with really, really deep conversation. Doesn't happen all the time, but it happens from time to time. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, I believe it was April or May of 2023, I was at an event and I was introduced to today's guest. And we got into this really fascinating conversation. One of the things I love about doing the work we do is that I get to meet people that do all kinds of things that a lot of times I don't even understand. A lot of times I'm not even sure how all the pieces fit together, but learning about what other people do and how they're implementing technology, how they're implementing artificial intelligence, how they're engaging with education. That is what we are all about here on the Tech Ed Podcast. So today I have the distinct opportunity to introduce to our audience Dr. Ajay Sahajpal. And Ajay is the medical director of Abdominal Transplant and I'm going to try and get this right, Hepatobiliary program, and Advocate Aurora Health, by the way. He's also the executive medical director of the Global and Executive Health Program. Ajay, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be.
It's awesome to have you here in the studio, by the way, in person, which is always fun. And did I say the word right? Hepatobiliary?
You did. You said it perfectly. Yeah.
so just for what it's worth, I did write that out phonetically on my paper here. But glad to hear I got it right. As I was learning about your background, you're from a small town in Canada and a first-generation immigrant to the United States of America. And now you've got this really, really cool career in medicine. So let's start out with that. Tell us about your roots and then tell us a little bit about how you found your way into medicine and what brought you here to the United States.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my father, who's actually just turned 98, emigrated. Yeah,
That's
thank
awesome.
you. Emigrated from India in 1966. And ironically, he emigrated the day of my birthday, my future birthday, December 10th.
Wow.
And most Indians that emigrated to the U.S. or Canada, in Canada, they entered either Toronto or Vancouver and stayed around.
Yeah.
My dad went through Montreal, so they pointed him east. He was a teacher, and so he ended up in Prince Edward Island.
Wow.
So he taught in a one-room classroom and then got married and then settled down, had family there. And so I grew up in small town Prince Edward Island.
Awesome. Yeah, that's absolutely. And I admit that I've never been there, but it must have been an amazing place to grow up.
It was an amazing place to grow up. It was quite unique.
Yeah, absolutely. So your dad's 98. I mean, that's incredible. So, and you've got, a family that is, still relatively young. That's quite the span there to cover that many years. I actually come from a family like that. So, my dad is now, he'll be 88 next month, as a matter of fact. And my grandma passed away now 33 years ago at the age of 98. So quite the span there.
Yeah.
My grandfather, actually, my paternal grandfather was born in 1888. And people
That's
are always
amazing.
like, how in the world? You mean like your great-grandparent? No, my grandfather was born in 1888. So what a cool opportunity to kind of span those generations. And so you're growing up on Prince Edward Island. Are the oysters as good there as they are here? That's right?
What they say. Whether they're PEI oysters they ship in, but I'm vegetarian.
Okay.
But I can tell you that oysters are a big delicacy there.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, really cool background. What brought you to the U.S. and how'd you get excited about the world of medicine?
Yeah. So growing up, I think my parents had sort of instilled the values of hard work and education, and healthcare kind of was calling to us. It was serving other people and serving the community and stable.
Sure.
And so I got interested in medicine early on, and then I ended up doing my surgery in Toronto, University of Toronto.
Okay.
And then I fell in love with liver and transplant.
Okay.
And there was a surgeon at Mayo Clinic that I really wanted to learn under. So then I went to the Mayo Clinic. And then the rest was history. You marry an American and you stay in America.
Yeah. So Mayo Clinic, and were you in Rochester, Minnesota?
In Rochester, Minnesota.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're the first person on the podcast that said they fell in love with liver. So tell us a little bit about that, right? So I mean, you've got to want to be a transplant surgeon to find your way into that, right? I've got to believe that the rigors, both educationally in terms of residency and so on, have to be incredibly challenging. What kind of prompted this interest and this love for the work that you do?
That's a great question. When I was in medical school, I did my surgery rotation, and then I ended up working with a liver surgeon. I was just always very fortunate in my career, just right place, right time.
Yeah, right.
But the surgeon had done the first liver transplant in Canada. He was one of the original liver surgeons, so he started liver transplant in the country. And I worked with him. I remember we went to see a very sick young lady that was about 18 years old, and her liver was failing, and she was dying. And all of a sudden she got listed for a transplant and got transplanted. And a week later, I remember seeing her walking around the hallways.
Wow.
I just realized this is just amazing. And so I
Absolutely.
fell in love with transplant.
That's awesome. I mean, you've got to almost feel like a miracle worker, right? To be part of that system that enables that individual to have an entirely new lease on life. I mean, think about the parents of an 18-year-old
Yeah.
child and the, the whole the whole uncertainty that goes along with that kind of a health issue, and to be able to literally save that individual's life. I mean, that's got to be incredibly fulfilling and rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, I think seeing the whole spectrum from the gift of life from the donor family grieving,
Mm-hmm.
and then the donation, and then seeing someone basically going from death to life, it just was remarkable, rewarding the whole spectrum of it. And then seeing how just generous people can be and how appreciative people can be,
Sure.
and seeing how the whole team is working towards a common goal. It was just inspiring, even from that time in my career, just inspiring to see.
Absolutely. And now these many years later, you're doing some really, really interesting things. I'll admit that I understand the work that you do very superficially. I mean, and, all of us know, what, I guess you can kind of, it's intuitive what transplant surgery is and so on, and how it can benefit individuals. But that's about the extent of my knowledge. What are some misconceptions that somebody like me or others might have about the work you do, Ajay?
Yeah, I think the big thing is a lot of people don't realize how much goes into it from a team perspective. I may be captain of the team if I'm doing that surgery, but it's
Sure.
a team from the nurses on the floor to the transporters to everybody to the lab techs. Transplant patients come with really the whole hospital needs to be behind them, because there's so much that goes on with immunosuppression, medications, complications, other things, that it's really, to successfully do transplant, you need a great team, a big supporting cast. And I think a lot of people don't realize.
So, and every one of those individuals has obviously their own education, their own area of expertise, and it's, like any other endeavor, although at a much, much more critical level, I suppose. Without all those pieces fitting together, the process and the surgery isn't successful. And so it's, I think that's an important lesson for all of us, no matter what kind of work we do, right? Is that the degree to which we rely on other people with different skills and different abilities. Anything else that would surprise our listeners about transplant surgery and the work that
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's interesting is, as part of some of my work in the community, I've met some people from other backgrounds.
Yeah.
And one of our common friends, who's a former Navy SEAL,
Yep.
talks about, part of the beauty of the Navy SEALs of how they get their mission done is each person has a specialized task,
Right.
and cumulatively their tasks meet the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that, and I think about transplant. That's really what it is everybody has a task, and if everyone is doing their task, then the ultimate goal is saving the. It's just amazing to see the parallels in different fields, but that's really how it really flows.
Yeah, absolutely. That mutual friend, by the way, is himself a former guest on the Tech Ed podcast. Really, really early, 3.5 years ago, when we were just standing this up. Bill Berrien, who's now the CEO of Pindell Global Precision, but did lead a Navy SEAL team as well, and just an incredible individual. Then exactly right. I mean, you've got your own Navy SEAL team doing the work of transplants, and I've got to believe, in every endeavor that we're involved in, whether it's the work that we do at the podcast, whether it's the work that we do in educational technology. I still serve on several manufacturing boards and so on. Technology is advancing so quickly in every aspect of our economy, every single market space. It almost sounds blasé or ridiculous to say, is that happening in the world of transplant surgery and healthcare? Because we know it is. But tell us a little bit about how some of these advancing technologies are changing how you do your work.
Yes, actually, in the past couple of years, it's changed dramatically because there's lots of new technology around preservation of organs and pumps. And so also there's xenotransplant. So there's two things occurring in parallel. One is really taking organs, putting them on a pump, able to recover them, make them better, make them last longer before you transplant them. So you're increasing the pool of organs that can be donated and used. Wow. And there's a lot of work being done in that. There's several companies in that space doing that right now. In parallel, to also meet the needs for life-saving organs, there's a lot of work being done in the lab with xenotransplant, or basically humanized pig livers, humanized primate organs.
Can you call that xenotransplant?
Xenotransplant.
With an XENO?
With an XENO.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm sure people have seen in the news, there's been some stories where people got, there's patients that have received heart transplants and kidney transplants from basic humanized pig organs. That is really amazing work, and that is going to be the future.
Wow.
Both of those things in parallel will be the future of meeting needs of organ transplant.
So just to kind of touch on that first one, am I understanding correctly that let's say that we've got in this case a liver, and maybe it's not a perfectly healthy liver, it's eligible for a transplant, but we want to improve the function of that liver before we perform it. There's things that you can do, and I had no idea this was the case. You can do in a lab to improve the function of that organ before you place it in an individual.
Yeah, you take it out, you put it on a pump, and you perfuse it with blood, and you can kind of manipulate some of the fluid to help improve it and recover and improve some damage, and then you can put it in. Yeah,
that's incredible.
It's amazing. These are all things that are happening like in real time. I'm getting to witness it.
Wow, that's incredible. Who does that work? I mean, is that a scientist that's working in a lab?
So that's where it starts. So the stuff that we're seeing today, I remember reading articles about it 10, 15 years ago, actually from Switzerland, that actually published some of this initial data. And that is really what we're seeing play out. So it starts, 10 years sooner in the lab. Xenotransplantation really has been going on for many, many years. Many people have been putting research into this for over 30 years. But we're now starting to see it turn into a viable option.
Fascinating. And maybe a little bit of a bizarre question, but are there certain animals that lend themselves best to xenotransplants?
Pigs actually are a perfect animal. They have a lot of similarities with humans, but they're different enough.
Yeah. It's just fascinating. And, think about where you started. You're saying some of this we were talking about 15 years ago, and now it's becoming a reality. Let me ask you this question. If we're going to turn the clock forward 15 or 20 years from now, what kind of things are you reading or thinking about now that would blow people away 15 years from now as far as advancing technology? Give us a real kind of wild, crazy example.
I think really what's going to happen is you're going to be able to take cells from your own body, whether it's a saliva sample, you're going to be able to break it down and specialize it back into a liver or a kidney cell. And you're going to be able to use 3D printing or a humanized xenotransplant to grow your own organ that's going to suit you. And then you wouldn't need any immunosuppression.
Wow.
And so I do think that's what's going to probably be the future in about 20 or 30.
So connect the dots for somebody that's, non-clinical, non-technical in this area. How could that even work, that you take a cell from your saliva and turn it into an organ? I mean, what are the steps that would have to take place in order for that to happen?
So you would have to take the cell from the saliva. You'd have to then use the genetic material in the cell to almost regress it back to what we call a pluripotent cell, which is kind of when you're an embryo, you have those cells.
Sure.
And then you redifferentiate it depending on the hormones and the milieu you create to form back into a different type of specialized cell, like a liver cell or a kidney cell.
Yeah.
And then you need to use a matrix, whether it's 3D printing or an animal matrix, to grow the whole organ again. I mean, these are things some people are doing in different pockets in their labs.
Yeah.
And so these are all technologies that exist. It's a matter of bringing it all together and having it happen.
Well, and as you're talking about that, we think about the work that we're doing in the ed tech space and additive manufacturing, 3D printing. Yeah. And, now we're printing in materials like PLA, or maybe it's metal, powderized metal or something. And you're talking about being able to do that organically using the same sense, just build it up in some fashion. That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the future.
What a cool environment and world that you get to do your work in. You started the conversation, Ajay, with the story about this 18-year-old girl who, had her whole life in front of her, but for the fact that she had a failing liver and being able to change that life. Give us a couple stories. I mean, can you share a couple of it's just like, touch our hearts a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I'll tell you, though, to be in full transparency, you tend to hang on to the ones you couldn't help, or the ones that didn't end well. And those are the ones that keep you up at night, and those are the ones that you think about.
Yeah, but they drive innovation.
They drive innovation. They drive innovation, and they reinforce your passion. But I'll tell you, without giving too much away for identifiers, there's a young guy similar to my age with a young family who's pretty typical Midwestern guy, volunteer firefighter, works full time, young family, who presented with a really bad cancer about 7 years ago. I know 7 years ago because he just had an anniversary. And we put him through a very aggressive chemotherapy and radiation protocol, successfully transplanted him with a liver, and he's doing well, which, I mean, he basically walked into my office with a death sentence. And, whether a higher power was looking up for him, and he just happened to have a very good response to treatment, but we hit him hard with chemo and radiation. And, when I see him on Facebook, or I see him in the community periodically, or his kid, I mean, it makes it all worthwhile.
No doubt about that. And you think about it's not just the impact on that person's life, right? But to be a young father and imagine putting your family through
Yeah.
that, not that, through no fault of his own. And then there again, be able to, find a way to work through that challenge, of course, with the help of great doctors like yourself and your team. That's got to be just incredibly fulfilling. I want to get into some of the other work you're doing. I want to stay on the topic of your current roles right now. And as I suggested in the introduction, you're also the executive medical director of the Global and Executive Health Program. What is that? And what kind of work are you doing?
Yeah, so that's interesting. You don't really go into healthcare thinking about that as
Yeah.
something you'll end up doing. So it's been good for me because it's the opposite spectrum of very, very sick patients in the ICU. But basically, our former CEO, Dr. Turkle, had the idea back in 2008, which is around the time I started, to invest in the community and invest in trying to provide this more as a resource for some of the executives in town. And so basically, prior to that, people were going to Mayo Clinic or other places for executive physicals.
Right.
And so the intent was keep patients local.
Okay.
I know St. Luke's has always had a strong cardiac background, a strong reputation. And this was to sort of piggyback off of that. So they had invested in a couple of well-known cardiologists from Mayo Clinic that came and brought some of their practice and then doubled down on growing it. So we've had an executive health program at Aurora, St. Luke's, since about 2009. And so during the pandemic, I was asked, just shortly before the pandemic started, I was asked to participate and get involved just to support the patients in the community.
Okay.
Because I'm so invested in the community.
Sure.
And so it's been very rewarding to do that. It's a different type of healthcare for me.
Sure.
I'm very passionate about longevity,
Mhm.
and it's kind of been one of those things where I get to use some of my interest in longevity, coordinating patients and helping patients, both high functioning executives that support the community,
Right.
and their businesses support the community, keeping them healthy, but also being able to still do transplant surgeries and cancer surgeries. So through the integration with Atrium and Advocate Health, they actually have a very robust concierge medicine program.
Okay.
So it's been nice because we're starting to integrate, and I think our program, which is already quite strong, is going to actually get even stronger over the next couple of years.
Awesome. So the patients are, and you suggested this a little bit, if I'm a senior executive in a large company, for example, and I've got thousands of people, in some cases, maybe even more, whose livelihoods, whose future are resting on my leadership and on my ability to remain healthy and do this for a long time, perhaps, if I'm a strong leader. And so you're engaging with those individuals. Those are the patients, right?
Yeah.
And then this idea of concierge medicine, which I'm somewhat familiar with, but for our audience, talk a little bit about what that is.
So there's several different models out there, but for concierge medicine, is really the goal is to keep people, especially that have key roles in organizations, support the organization, keep them healthy.
Yeah.
And then from concierge medicine standpoint, they essentially are able to reach out to their physician to coordinate care, get seen, get things triaged. And so we help support that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool work. And, you mentioned your whole focus on and fascination with longevity. And I know just from following you on social media, that's, all kinds of awards and accolades and things that you're involved with around that topic. We could probably do a whole discussion on the topic of longevity. And in fact, while we're on that topic, 2 or 3 things people should be thinking about if they want to live a longer and healthy life.
I'm a firm believer that proper sleep and sleep hygiene is crucial.
Yep.
I think a lot of people take that for granted.
Yeah.
Can never catch up. So sleep hygiene.
I'm a 7.5 to 8 hour night guy, by the way. So
that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yep.
Yeah. Sleep hygiene. And then do your proper screening, standard MEC recommendation screening, cancer screening, cardiac screening. And then the one that a lot of people don't talk about, but I think some form of calorie restriction or staying healthy on a healthy diet.
Yep.
So cutting down excess unneeded calories.
Sure.
That's one area I think that's the biggest opportunity is staying active, staying healthy, and eating appropriately. I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Terrific. Yeah. So make sure that you're getting your sleep was one, making sure that you're watching your calories and eating the right types of things, really, really important, and get your screenings. Make sure you're seeing your doctor regularly and taking their advice. And that, those are the keys. That makes tremendous sense. And for our audience, I mean, if you're interested in this stuff, follow Ajay on social, because you'll get a ton of stuff in your feed that's always really, really fascinating. Cool. So let's now switch gears a little bit, away, maybe perhaps a little bit from the world of medicine. You were a presidential leadership scholar, class of 2019. For our audience, probably most of whom may not be familiar with that program, what is the PLS program, and what did that experience entail for you?
Sure. It's a leadership development program.
Right.
It's designed for mid-career professionals from all different walks of life. There's about 60 people a year. And that's actually where I ended up meeting our mutual friend, Bill Barry.
Yep.
So it started in 2015, and it was designed to be completely bipartisan. So it was started by the foundations of Presidents George H.W. Bush, President George W. Bush, the Foundation for President Lyndon B. Johnson, and President Bill Clinton.
Awesome. Truly bipartisan.
It's truly bipartisan.
Over a number of years, too.
Yeah. And so basically, it's a deep immersion into all things America, politics, supporting the community, everything. You learn from their administration on leadership, different facets and different modules, whether it's strategy, decision making, collaboration, service. And so it was quite remarkable. Went on for 6 months, but even today it still continues like a fraternity or a sorority. So we communicate, we have alumni meetings, we have a private network with feeds and WhatsApp chats where we all communicate, help each other. So it's very cool.
What's the how many in the cohort or how many in the class?
So 60 a year.
Okay, so it's 60 people of all walks of life, right?
All walks of life. And my class had about 8 or 9 physicians.
Okay.
Different backgrounds, and then probably 20 to 30 military between active duty and veterans.
Sure.
And then people from not-for-profits that are just trying to help the community, support homeless people, education.
Awesome.
Some big tech, CEOs and leaders.
So are you in DC then for the 6 months, or how does that work?
So you get to go back and forth. So different than the White House Fellowship, which is you move to DC for a year. This is designed so you can keep your job and work, and then you do these very concentrated sessions every, for 3 or 4 days every month, and then it starts in DC for a 5-day session.
Okay.
But they're very intense. You're basically there from the second you land to about 8 p.m. and then the next day it's like 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. So it's just nonstop with teaching and learning and collaboration.
Awesome. So if there's like one takeaway that you're like, you get to the end of the 6 months and it's like, I'm sure you learned a ton of things, but if there's like one thing you could point to that says this one thing was worth that whole experience, what would that be?
Probably the biggest takeaway for me is that there's a need for people to lean in and support.
Okay.
And if you can do that, it will make it better for everyone. Everyone just does a little bit of something, but it makes it better for everyone.
Absolutely. That whole service mentality. Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Now, you're not just like meeting and sharing ideas and listening. You're working on projects too, right? Tell us about that.
Correct. So I had been working prior to this, the Presidential Leadership Scholars. I had been working with Epic.
Sure. So it's the healthcare software company.
Healthcare software company. Yep. I had realized that right around 2012, 2013, there was new medications that hit the market for hepatitis C. Okay. And I realized we know predictably who's at risk for hepatitis C and walking around, because I'd seen some patients in my office just the day before I went to give this growth presentation, where the guy had basically retired, and then all of a sudden shows up 2 weeks later with a liver cancer. And then, oh, by the way, he had hep C and was never followed up, and this was preventable. Yeah. But by the time he showed up in my office, it was too late. So essentially, he works hard his whole life, blue-collar guy, retires, and then essentially gets a death sentence. And I realized there has to be a better way. And I realized with Epic, and you can actually start screening people. So we set up a whole screening program targeting mainly baby boomers. Okay. So when you show up in your doctor's office, you're a baby boomer, it's going to pop up in the medical record that you're a baby boomer, you're at risk, you should get screened. And then that way we're able to find people with hepatitis C that didn't know they had it. And then we're also able to take people that have hepatitis C and get them integrated. We call them and get them integrated so they get followed and treated and cured. Sure. And so I built that, and then we started doing that with other areas in healthcare, cardiac and et cetera, for monitoring for aneurysms and things. Sure. And so then I used that to dovetail with the project, and I was very fortunate. I had some good partnership with the team. Yep. But my co-partners, and we were recognized in The Economist for sort of being a change maker. Wow. As a team in that. And then that's kind of when we integrated with Advocate in Illinois, my proposal for the Presidential Scholars in the project was take that same technology and expand it across state borders. And if we can do it in our system, why can't we do it in the bigger system? Why can't we do it with Epic nationally and do things like that? And so that was some of the work I was working on.
That's really cool. So we'll get into some of the data science stuff here in a minute, but are you just looking at age in that case, or are there other indicators that you're measuring?
So for that specific one, for hepatitis C, it was age cohort. Okay. But for things like aneurysm screening, it was smoking background. Okay. So there was depending on what you're looking at, you can pick what your parameters are. But now with the medical record having all this data,
Right.
the big picture intent was we have the data, so why not use the data to actually
Yep.
help people
Yeah,
proactively
absolutely.
instead of just collecting the data and having it sit there.
Yeah. So one takeaway as I'm hearing this is be honest with your doctor, right? When they
Yeah,
say, have you ever smoked? Are you a
yeah,
smoker? Do you have a history of this? Do you? Don't be embarrassed. Don't be whatever. Get that data into your record, because that's the way that we're going to use that data, and then compare it to huge data sets, and now and in the future to tell you what you're at risk for, and make sure we're doing the right screenings and early intervention and the whole thing. I
correct.
mean, really, 'cause you're doing such fascinating work. I mean, you're continuing to do that now, right? So you said you're taking that across Advocate and looking at how you can do it. Epic, by the way, there's only a couple of kind of, it's almost like the Kleenex of, or the Band-Aid of medical
Hmm.
record processing and retention and so on. Cerner, is that the other one? Am I?
Cerner's the
Yeah.
other one.
And so there's only a couple. So now you're talking about doing that at scale with a company like Epic that is working with, thousands and thousands of healthcare providers. Is that where this is going, or how's that work proceeding now?
So with the project, the goal was to just implement it across state lines. So I did that.
Mhm.
I did look into, as one of the people I met in the program actually that connected me with DC and some people to talk about, can we take this national?
Mhm.
And then I will fully confess that I got distracted with some of the needs in our
Of
community.
course.
So I was always interested in education
Right.
in our community,
Mhm.
and then I just realized I really wanted to focus back on trying to do what I could to support our community.
Absolutely. Well, and that's where a lot of times service makes the biggest difference,
Yeah,
right? You're passionate about it. You see the immediate result. You see the need, right? And you feel compelled and drawn to try and drive some change. And I know you're really involved in education. We're going to get into that here in just a moment on the Tech Ed podcast. Before we do, on this topic of leadership, right? So let's talk about some of the other leadership work that you're doing. You serve on Aurora Systems Health Board. Talk about that work and maybe some of the unique challenges in the communities you're serving, especially in areas like Milwaukee. As our audience knows, I grew up in suburban Milwaukee.
yeah.
Some of my favorite guests are people, we talk to people all over the world, but when we can talk about things that are, near and dear to my heart, I love those conversations. How are you trying to drive change through the work you're doing, not just as as a medical professional, but also at the board level?
Yeah, so I think one thing I realized through the professional scholars and in my time here is that health systems have an obligation to support the community, and they know that, and
Of
they do
course.
that. And
Yep.
so, one thing we realized was an opportunity is after the merger with Advocates and Dr. Turkle retired, we realized that the Aurora brands, there was opportunity. The Aurora brand got absorbed within the Advocate Aurora brand, and we
Yep.
realized that there was a need and an opportunity to rebrand and rejuvenate Aurora, because Aurora meant something in the
Sure.
community, and the infinity symbol. This was our co-CEOs, Jim Skogsberg and Gene Woods, realized this was the opportunity. So we hired a new CEO for Wisconsin, Gabrielle Finley Hazel, who I think you've probably met in the MMAC.
Right.
And the goal is to support the community. We realize we have an obligation to redouble down, support our community, support our teammates,
Mm-hmm.
support our patients to make it better for everybody. And I think you're starting to see some of those changes where we're back in the community.
Right.
And I think that's really what we're trying to accomplish is say we want to focus on health inequities, closing some of those gaps,
Right.
targeting our populations that have been kind of marginalized, Hispanics, African Americans, where
Mhm.
there's opportunity,
Right.
whether it's education, healthcare screening, other, and you're seeing a lot of that work being done now.
Yep.
And I think our forward-thinking leaders have realized that this is where the future is, because this is our future workforce.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah.
This is the future workforce. So if you keep your community healthy, you keep your health system healthy.
Absolutely. And that provides growth and economic prosperity
Yeah.
for all of us. And beyond the fact that it frankly is just the right thing to do, right? To
Yeah.
create as many opportunities as we can for as many people. And I don't want that point to be lost. I think a lot of times in this day and age, when we think about, the corporation and the profit centers that healthcare in some cases can become, like any other organization, that it's really, the organizations that you're involved with, Ajay, are really groups of people that are passionate about their communities, that care about other people, that are doing work for the right reasons. And yeah, there's certainly an economic aspect to every single business model, but at its core, I think that's a really important message for our audience to hear, and something that clearly drives the work that you do. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think seeing the dividends go back to frontline patients and teammates in the community is really full circle.
Yeah, absolutely makes it real, and really is a reminder of for all the sacrifices that you made to get to where you are, that they were all worth it because you're making huge differences in people's lives, and in the way that you do that is going to continue to evolve. We've talked a little bit about, some of these indicators and doing work around, the right screenings for the right people based upon, a whole host of sources of data that are particular to them, or at least the, the demographic group that they're involved in and so on. How is data going to change healthcare going forward? I mean, we know that it can, but what are some of the barriers? I'm sure there's some in terms of, privacy and so on that are standing in the way of us doing even more of the kind of work that you're doing with data to prescribe care and to inform the work that you do.
Yeah, I think some of the privacy concerns are legitimate, and we see some leaks across the nation at the
Right.
healthcare sites. I do think, in terms of technology and the data, I think what you're going to see is more AI
Yep.
driving parts of healthcare
Sure.
and complementing and supporting physicians and to provide that care, but
Yep.
also in screening. So I think processing the data, using the data, AI will have a role in the future.
Absolutely. So, any thoughts on kind of how, I mean, so we've got these huge data sets. Is it going to be companies like Epic that are leveraging that data and helping to, to understand and to prescribe and to predict potential, future adverse outcomes and work our way around that. And then, if there's one thing that, for instance, that the legislative study committee should be considering as they're thinking about AI as it relates to the work that you do, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think as long as privacy can be protected,
Mhm.
I think the data should be used in a way to benefit all patients. And
Mhm.
so if you look at some countries like Sweden where it's nationalized,
Yep.
the data is automatically something that's accessible to help people.
Sure.
And so I think that would be the future, perfect state where everyone's privacy is protected.
Yep.
But you can use that data to machine learn and
Yep.
teach AI how to process it, how to reliably recognize that you can help other patients. That would be the perfect for me.
For sure. Yeah. It's just, I mean, it's fascinating. We talk on the podcast quite often about this whole idea of what we call it, the edge to cloud continuum, right? So in my work of manufacturing, it's putting sensors on manufacturing equipment, gathering data, creating data sets, using those data sets at the cloud level and artificial intelligence and machine learning platforms to, go through all that labeled data, find correlations, and then use that data to, in the case of manufacturing, predict the future failure of a robot, for an example. We talk about that all the time here on the podcast. Really the same thing in healthcare, right? So you're using sensors and you're using devices, you're gathering data, you're looking at everything from, health histories, demographics, actual, patient data, and then creating those large language models and then learning from it. And I think what an exciting time that we're living in. Now, none of that happens, of course, without us creating a pipeline of young people that are fascinated and excited by this stuff. And of course, that's a huge topic that we talk about all the time here is, inspiring young people toward really, really cool careers. We've got to get young people excited about these kind of technologies. So in addition to the board work you're doing at Advocate Aurora, I should say, you're also doing board work at the Milwaukee Academy of Science. I know you're involved with Aug Prep as well. And by the way, Abby Andrich, who's the CEO of Aug Prep, St. Augustine Preparatory Academy, is also a former guest here on the Tech Ed podcast, sat in the same chair you're in about three or 4 months ago. So talk about that. Talk about what, the unique work that you're doing at the Milwaukee Academy of Science, and then touch on Aug Prep as well, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm passionate about education. I
Yeah.
think that comes from my father. And so it's always been something that's I'm interested in because I think education is a great equalizer. Right? I mean, I grew up, my dad came with no money. I grew up middle class in Canada. And
what was his job, by the way?
He was a
What his
teacher.
career?
He was
Okay,
actually a high school English teacher
Awesome.
for 40 years almost. And
Yeah.
so I just realized there's education's the equalizer. It really
sure.
is. And that's part of the American dream. It's
Absolutely.
education's your way up. And part of what I'm seeing is that if we don't educate our children, we're never going to be able to make it a better world for them.
For sure.
And so Aug Prep is something that when Gus Ramirez and Becky were developing the school, I realized it was the right thing for the community. And, St. Luke's is on the south side. It's a large Hispanic population. I saw what the vision was and the pipeline for future students.
Yeah.
So on a personal level, I was involved, and my wife and I contributed some money to a classroom related to science and
Awesome.
STEM to
Yeah.
support the school.
Love it.
Because I wanted to do it in my father and mother's name, but
Yeah.
also because I think it's the right thing for kids.
Right.
At the same time, in parallel, one of my close friends was on the board of the Milwaukee Academy of Science, and they were in a reboot. We were searching for a new CEO, and he asked if I would consider joining. And so I've been on that board for almost a decade. And
Wow.
right at the same time, we hired a new CEO, and it's been just a privilege to be a part of that.
Yep.
I wish I could spend more time there.
Yeah.
But just seeing the school grow, develop, our scores improve, expanding, and the number of kids we're serving, it's been amazing to see it develop and
Yep.
see some of the collaborations we're doing in the community around getting kids into the hospitals and into tech industry faster.
Yep, absolutely. And it's an and not or, right? So we're huge, at least I am, I'm sure you feel the same way, huge supporters of our public schools. I'm a product of a public school education, huge supporters of charter schools, huge supporters of private schools. It's really about how do you provide the best opportunities for the greatest number of students, knowing that not every one of them are coming from the same place, starting in the same place, have the same interests, have the same aptitudes, and really just creating these opportunities. Education being the great equalizer. I think that's a perfect way of saying it. It doesn't matter where you necessarily came from, as long as those opportunities are available to you. And I think in a lot of cases, certainly in Southeast Wisconsin and all over the country, the important work that we need to do is making sure that opportunity is available to every student that has an interest and every parent that has a desire to provide those opportunities for their children, and every student to provide them for themselves. So really, really important work you're doing in both of those institutions. As you know, we're great supporters of both of them, as well as the public schools here in Southeast Wisconsin. So incredible work. Talk about, because every one of those has its own kind of unique pathway, benefit, philosophy of education for the audience members, and probably most of them who aren't very familiar with the Milwaukee Academy of Science. What's unique about that institution and the way that they're delivering learning?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. One, it's very nimble, so different. And I'm a full supporter of public schools. I'm also a public school product.
Yeah,
I just think not every child learns the same way.
for sure.
And so the Milwaukee Academy of Science, we're very nimble, so we can adapt to the needs of our children. And we've done that where we have developed in the past couple of years, we've developed sort of a direct entry co-op program for certified nurse assistants. And so we have that program in place. We have lab tech program in place. We also now double down the MMAC and
Metropolitan Associated of Commerce.
And Lab Midwest, actually.
Yeah.
We actually have developed a curriculum that we're going to be rolling out next year regarding the tech industry and manufacturing, and getting kids trained in robotics, trained in tech, and really to develop the future generation for manufacturing for Wisconsin, but also the future generation for healthcare in Wisconsin. And so school has a big picture mandate, and we're trying to accomplish that for education and healthcare. But also, the beauty of the school is we don't say no. And so we will provide a safe space for kids that are sometimes not welcome in some other or not performing in other schools. We do everything we can to develop it. And, we developed the summer school curriculum that I'm very proud of, and the team. So, if you look at how people learn, that summer break, a lot of people progress their scores.
Right.
And we've realized that we need to meet the needs for either credit back or maintaining. And so we developed that. And so I think that the whole board and the whole school really move towards that goal of trying to educate our babies.
Awesome. Yeah, trying to educate our babies. I love the way that you put that. And by the way, I mean, it goes without saying, you don't get paid for any of this, right? It's volunteer. It's you're doing it for the right reasons. You're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, but just incredibly rewarding experiences to see whether it's a student that started in a certain spot and now can be a CNA, or somebody else that does, to your point, getting inspired toward careers in manufacturing. And one of the things that we like to point out is a lot of times just all that exposure is what really creates in defining what a young person's interest is and what they get excited about, and what we don't all learn the same way, we're not all inspired or interested in the same things. And so providing that wide array of different experiences, especially to young people when they're middle school, early high school, just starting to think about, and maybe even further along the lines of what their career might be. Really, really important work specific to kind of career choices. Let's sit down, kind of hypothetically with that young person who's maybe a student at the Milwaukee Academy of Science and is thinking about health sciences as a career. And, from your experience, what would you tell them? Why should they be considering, at least some of them, taking a pathway toward being a physician or a surgeon? And what, I think the other question is, what character traits do you think make somebody, since we're all wired a little bit different, make somebody successful in an endeavor like the one that you've gone about?
That's a great question. I think if I was talking to children, which I've done
I'm
at
sure.
Walking Academy of Science, I
Yeah.
think the big thing is you can be anything you want to be,
Okay.
as long as you're willing to do the work.
Yeah.
And you're willing to learn and take the opportunities presented in front of you.
Awesome.
And then I talk through, you just need to come to the hospital and see it. You don't have to be a doctor.
Right.
You don't have to be, you could be anything you want to be. You could be a pharmacy tech, a physiotherapist, a pharmacist, a social worker. And there's a lot of things that make the hospital run.
Right.
And so I talk through some of that, and
Sure.
we talk about, understanding that you will settle on what you feel you could do and
Right.
want to do,
Yep.
as long as you're serving patients and serving the community in whatever facet. And so I kind of really inspire them to come to the hospital. We set up a huge program. So I have a lot of students that come to the hospital from
Sure.
all walks of life.
Yeah.
Whether they're students from Mod Prep, students from MAS, students from MPS, students from university school,
Yeah.
but they come. So I feel like every week I have a different student there. We have some international students that come and spend some time with us, but it's really just to get them invigorated and energized around healthcare. And so back to our high schooler, I just say, you'll never know until you go see it.
Yeah.
So you have to come see it, see what you like. And then you start mapping out what steps you need to do to get there, and I can help you.
That's awesome. I think it was Tim Sheehy, who, as we've mentioned, the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce former president. But he said, and he heard it from a student. And I'm going to paraphrase it. I won't get it perfect, but I can't be it if I can't see it. And it's the whole idea of immersing them in that experience, taking them to the hospital, showing them the different careers, and getting them excited about what could be. To your point, the being willing to put the work in. And, these things don't happen on autopilot, but if somebody wants it bad enough and is willing to make the sacrifices, it's amazing where their careers can go. If I'm a student or I'm a parent that's listening to this podcast, I'm like, oh my goodness, how could I ever get my young person or myself an opportunity to see something like that? Is there a way they can engage with the work you're doing, or how does that,
Yeah,
does that
they
work?
just have to reach out.
Awesome.
Either they can email me or call my office and then send me a note. And then
Awesome.
Volunteer Services at Aurora Healthcare has been phenomenal partners, as have the hospital.
I bet.
And so we've made it very seamless now. Once they reach out, I connect them to Volunteer Services, they do all the necessary background check paperwork.
Yep.
And they come in, they set up a day, they come in and spend the day with us.
Awesome.
It's been very efficient, and it's been very rewarding.
Yeah, I can imagine. Rewarding for you and for the individuals participating, right? We'll be sure and link that information up in the show notes. So if you're listening and you have an interest, we'll make sure that contact information is in the show notes for this episode. And it's an episode, by the way, that is starting to wind down. I want to do one quick follow on to that last question, Ajay, which is the whole character trait idea, right? I mean, people that are successful in a role like the one that you have, every one of us come to the world with different curiosities and different interests and fascinations and attention to detail and, whatever role orientation, whatever personality traits we want to tie in there. Are there ones that resonate over and over with the people that you work with that make good healthcare professionals?
The willingness to work hard,
Yeah,
and the willingness to admit when you're wrong,
okay,
and to learn from it.
Yep.
And then you have to have overall compassion towards patients and serving.
Yeah.
I mean, that's whether it's in the community or in the hospital, it's the same principle.
Yeah.
You're trying to serve others and you're trying to help others.
I love that. So the whole idea of being willing to work really, really hard, keeping an open mind, admitting when you're wrong, and also having this passion for other individuals. And I want to do one more kind of follow-on question along those same lines, maybe perhaps. And we're going to go back in time. So we started with you growing up on Prince Edward Island in Canada, long before the whole medical career and all the accolades and the success that you've managed to generate over the course of your career. And let's go back to that 15-year-old Ajay Sahajpal, and you're growing up, I don't know what you called it in Canada, but you're the equivalent of a sophomore in high school here in the United States. If you could go all the way back in time, Ajay, and have one opportunity to give that young person a bit of career advice or life advice, what would you tell them that they should know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, aside from the obvious, which is invest in Amazon.
Yeah, there you go, right, or NVIDIA.
No, yeah. So I would say, when I reflect back, I think the one piece of advice is always take pause and try to understand where the other person across from is coming from before you say anything or do it.
Yeah.
Because I think I go through my life and I think the number of times where I should have just taken pause and taken time to understand the other person's perspective.
Absolutely. Take the time to think about what that person on the other side of the table is saying, where they're coming from, and then be really, really thoughtful about how you react to that. You've been really thoughtful today, Ajay, of how you've reacted to our questions, some really, really deep conversations, and kind of been a little bit in a really, really good way all over the map. It's been just a phenomenal episode, and really appreciate you coming in and spending some time with us.
My pleasure. I'm humbled and privileged to be here. Thank you, Matt.
This was such a phenomenal episode with Dr. Ajay Sahajpal, and we learned so much, and a lot of the resources that he had referenced over the course of this episode are going to be linked up in the show notes, so be sure and check those out. Those will be at techedpodcast.com/Ajay. That's techedpodcast.com/AJAY. And in as much as Dr. Sahajpal is all over social media, check him out there. Check us out while you're there as well. The Tech Ed Podcast is all over LinkedIn. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok. We're on Facebook. Doesn't matter where you go to consume your social media, you will find us there. Reach out, connect. We would absolutely love to hear from you. We would also love to see you again next week on the Tech Ed Podcast. For now, thanks so much for being with us. I am your host, Matt Kirkland.